This is Written on the Edge. I'm Van Sebastian here with my co-host, S.A. Baz Collins.
Hello.
And we're really glad you're here with us. Our guest this week is Greg Howard. Greg was born and raised in the South Carolina Lowcountry, where his love of stories blossomed at a young age. Following his songwriting dream to Nashville, Greg spent years producing the music of others before returning to his childhood passion for writing stories. His critically acclaimed debut middle grade novel, The Whispers, was nominated for an Edgar Award and is currently being adapted for film. His second middle grade novel, Middle School's a Drag, You Better Work, is being adapted for television by Harry Potter producer David Heyman, Heyday Television, and NBC Universal. Greg writes for and about LGBTQ youth, creating the kind of books he wishes he'd had access to as a young reader. And when he's not writing books, he enjoys traveling, reading, hiking, and spending time with his friends. He lives in Nashville with his two rescued fur babies, Molly and Riley. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. And thank you for jumping in last minute. It means a lot to us.
No problem.
So, Low Country, running around out there in the wilds, when did you decide to start writing?
Well, I apparently I was a very loquacious child, and part of my loquaciousness was making up stories on the spot just to get people to listen to me talking, So from what I'm told, I was spinning yarns from a very young age, but I just always had a really big imagination, and I loved getting lost in my imagination. I had some kind of traumatic things happen when I was a kid, and so my imagination was where I escaped to. And I remember, though, as far as writing down stories and wanting to become a writer, I was thinking about that at such a young age. I remember being in third grade, and I wrote my first book in third grade. And what that meant was I watched a TV movie, and then I wrote down everything that happened and called it my book. So I don't recommend that. It's called plagiarism. Yep. But, in third grade, I didn't know. I just wrote it all down in my spiral notebook, and I gave it to my
So you were starting your life of crime.
That's right.
Okay, got
That's right. So I gave it to my friend Michael, and he illustrated it with these fantastic illustrations. I wish I had a copy of that. And then we decided we were going to get it published, So we looked at our classroom library for books for publishers, and we found Dial Books, which is a subsidiary of Penguin now, and we sent it off to them. And we actually got a very nice rejection letter typed on their letterhead and everything. And it basically, said, we appreciate you sending us your work. We don't think this is quite right for us, but we hope you will resubmit to us in the future. And as it turns out, I'm now a writer for Penguin. So I guess it all worked out.
Well, there you go.
Nice. Gotta love it when it comes full circle,
you
right?
laid the groundwork.
I did. And then, from there, I thought I wanted to be a songwriter. So from the time I was like 12, I started writing songs, and mostly in church, because we were a very religious family. And so I would write all these gospel songs, and all through my teens. And then coming to Nashville out of college was a desire to be a songwriter. But I learned very quickly, because I grew up in South Carolina. Obviously, I went to school in North Carolina. The day I graduated from college, I drove to Nashville to be a famous songwriter. I thought that's just what you did. But I realized pretty quickly that I'd prefer a steady paycheck. And so I chose to get a job in the music business. And that just kind of derailed me from my creative pursuits, because I was so involved in the business end of music and a different kind of creative. I was creating product for a company. So all those creative little endeavors and detours and left turns, that's kind of how it all happened until I was getting close to the big 5-0 several years ago. And, I thought, you know what? I've always wanted to write a book, and I'm going to be 50 in a couple of years, and I want to do this before I'm 50. So I had been reading a lot of gay, like YA romance and I was just everything I get my hands on, from Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda to Will Grayson, Aristotle and Dante.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I think I have a unique perspective on this, being from the Deep South, very religiously oppressive community. So I just started writing this kind of racy, raunchy rom-com for teens, not for middle grade. And that year I got my agent and we sold the book, and it was, I had my publishing deal by the time I was 50. So it all worked out.
That's fantastic. So we've got two to talk about today. Middle School's a Drag, You Better Work, which, by the way, is a very fun title.
Thank you.
Tell us about it.
Well, Middle School's a Drag was my second middle grade novel for Penguin. And I was following up The Whispers, which was a very personal story, a very emotional story. And it's kind of heavy. It was cathartic to write about my mother in The Whispers, who died when I was very young. So I wanted something a lot lighter. So I always pull from my childhood. Middle School's a Drag came from when I was about 12 years old. I had a very entrepreneurial spirit, and I would start businesses from our laundry room / storage room / my dad's office in the garage. And I started all these kind of silly, stupid businesses, some that I put in the book. And so that's kind of the genesis of that story. And it's about a kid named Mikey Pruitt who is out to his friends and family, but he's not out to his whole middle school. And he decides he's going to start a junior talent agency. And his first client is a 13-year-old wannabe drag queen from his school. So it's a story of him building his junior talent agencies and the different clients he has from school. And this Julian character who wants to be a drag queen, and their journey together, and Mikey's journey to just being completely open about who he is and being proud of who he is.
Nice. So there's a lot in there actually for a middle school reader.
Yeah. And it's very funny. It's more of a light story. It's a lot of humor, but it does have, a lot of heart. And I think that's one thing that all my books have is heart and hope.
And according to your publicist, a Fox News angry mom incident happened with that book?
Well, it was actually Fox News angry Laura Ingraham. Yeah. So
the monster herself.
Yeah, I was just sitting at my desk one day and somebody sent me a email saying, I want to thank you for writing Middle School's a Drag. I just read it and it's so beautiful and so fun. And I want to thank Laura Ingraham for letting me know about it. I'm like, what are you talking about? So I asked, and the school board director who read it said, yeah, I was watching Fox News Laura Ingraham because she was doing a piece on banning books. And we're having that issue in our community. And I wanted to know what the other side was saying. And she said, and then, she held up your book and she sent me a link, and they're talking about this teacher's summer reading list. And next thing I know, there's the cover of my book on the screen, and Laura Ingraham calling it sickening that this book was on this suggested reading list by this teacher. And that was...
Well, girl, wear that as a badge of honor.
I know. Yeah, a lot of people... It is in a way that I pissed them off.
You need to send a copy to her brother.
True. He would probably enjoy it.
Yes.
But it did open a lot of doors for me. It got me into conversations about book bannings with other news outlets. I wrote a piece for HuffPost about that incident, So, I hate that there are people out there trying to keep these books out of the kids' hands who need them.
Right.
But sometimes the people that are making all that noise are their own worst enemy, because sales always go up. And you tell a kid not to read a book, they're going to find a way to read a book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And to me, the biggest problem with it is when you take books off the shelves like that and try to restrict access, the kid's going to find it anyway if they want to read it, and you've just taken yourself out of the conversation.
Right.
Whereas it could have been a meaningful back and forth about what this book is about and how it applies or doesn't apply, but you've just completely erased your child and taken yourself out of a potential conversation.
Right. Well, thank you for telling these stories, because you've furthered the conversation in ways that very few people get to. So
thank you.
Yes,
Kudos to you.
Thanks.
And speaking of works that would be a great conversation with a child, your latest, The Visitors,
Yeah,
has some depth to it.
it's heavy. No, I say it's heavy, but there's some heavy issues and topics that are covered. But it's it's a middle grade book, so it's handled in a way that is accessible to younger readers. There's a lot of humor in it, to keep that interest. But I didn't shy away from dealing with some heavy issues like self-harm, about how we are not taught the truth about slavery in this country. And not everyone is, certainly not in the area I grew up in. And
they're working very hard to make sure it stays that way.
exactly. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to write this book, because I did grow up right down the road from a deserted rice plantation that we believed was haunted. And it's very much, I'm pointing to it over here, but you can't see it.
Do you want to hold it?
It is very much the way it's described in the book, the plantation that I grew up down the road from. And so I chose that to be the setting because that place really made an impact on me when I was a kid and my big imagination. And I believe I saw ghosts there, and I believe these, crazy things happened. But the point of it is I didn't realize at that age what had actually gone on at that plantation, because we were given this very whitewashed view of the old South, the antebellum South, and everybody was happy, and the enslaved people were treated like family, and blah, blah, blah. We weren't taught the real truth. So as I got older and started, learning and reading, and I spent a few years doing my own anti-racism work, I really wanted to write this book to engage young white readers, especially in a part of history that they simply don't have to think about if they don't want to. Hopefully that will provoke some meaningful conversations. But with the self-harm, with the slavery issue, and there's also physical abuse within a family, those are topics you don't really usually talk about in middle grade fiction. And I was prepared for all kinds of pushback, and my editor was trying to prepare me. But as far as what I've seen online and what's come to me personally, I haven't experienced that. So what I have experienced are people wanting to keep it out of schools, because of it talks about the real truth of slavery.
You're in there with Toni Morrison, so
right.
Can't be a better crowd.
Exactly. So yeah, it's probably my favorite of all my novels I wrote, and that's saying something, because The Whispers is about my mom, but The Visitors just about kicked my butt when I was writing it, and it was hard. I just thought, I'll write a ghost story. Well, that's hard, but so yeah, The Visitors is out there now. It's been out since February 1st, and reception from people who've actually read it is very, very positive.
Nice. So I know we've talked about the topics contained therein. For, say, adults who might want to buy this for a young reader, what's the plot?
The plot, thank you for driving me back to the plot that I didn't mention. It is the story of the ghost of a 12-year-old boy that is stuck on this deserted rice plantation in the Lowcountry of South Carolina. And he doesn't know how he got there. He doesn't know what happened to him there. And he certainly doesn't understand why he can't leave this place. He tries to leave all the time. He tries walking out the front gates, and he ends up walking right back in. He tries going through the woods and ends up walking right back in. He can't be free of this plantation. And on the plantation are the spirits of some of the other people who used to live on the plantation, including the owner of the plantation, some of the enslaved people. And one day, these living kids show up on their bicycles to explore the plantation, and they start talking about a podcast they're doing, and he's eavesdropping on them. We don't know who the narrator is, by the way, for most of the book. He's eavesdropping. He hears these names that they're talking about for their podcast, and it starts to spark some memories. And he believes if he can figure out what happened to him there, that he can find his way out of there and find his way home. So he ends up befriending these living kids, and they try to help him put together the pieces of the puzzle of his past.
Nice. Very, very nice.
Yeah, I have to ask you, let me jump in here real quick, because having written, that's kind of the area I write, although mine tend to be more new adult because the sex is more explicit. But
hmm
how did you deal with? I mean, I'm assuming your stories are contemporarily set in the now. Are they?
They usually are. This one's a little bit different in that it is set in a contemporary setting, is set now. But this
Well, I mean, you're
boy,
talking about them doing a podcast, so that's why I'm kind of
right? Yeah, but this boy, he went that they're looking for went missing 50 years ago. So we get flashbacks of that kid that they're looking for and what his life was like in the early 70s, which was kind of fun for me because I remember the early 70s, and I got to talk about Bobby Sherman and the Carpenters and Lost in Space and all those
Nice.
things, and the boy has a crush on Bobby Sherman, and I had a huge crush on Bobby Sherman.
Aw.
But
Tiger Beat.
I know, right? And he also talks about Walter Cronkite, the narrator does, about how Walter Cronkite used to make him, who, for those of you who don't know, was the anchor for the CBS Evening News for many years through the 50s and 60s and 70s. And how Walter Cronkite used to make him feel safe because he didn't have a very safe home life. But every night when he watched the news, he felt like Walter Cronkite was in control and had everything, under wraps.
Well, the reason why I was asking you that was my prelude question was one of the struggles I had in the here and now is dealing with social media and dealing with phones and dealing with, because so many kids are just, they're not looking up and having
Right.
the conversation. So how did you deal, or did you deal with it? Some authors choose not to. They just completely ignore it as if it doesn't exist. How do you deal with it, especially because you're talking about podcasts? So obviously these kids are technically inclined to a degree. How did you deal with it?
It's a great question. It was kind of fun in the visitors because the narrator, the ghost, he doesn't understand what those things are.
Right.
One of the living kids that shows up is trans. He doesn't understand what trans is. And he doesn't understand what. The only thing he knows about cell phones is he's seen people who have come there over the years, and he calls them magic pocket phones. That's what he calls them. And the device that they're recording their podcast on, there are those things, and he has no clue what they are. So there's that learning. But overall in my books, I try to use those things at a minimum because, my editors always wanted me to be very careful about dating the books, so if I have too many pop culture references, or if I talk about brands like sneakers or whatever, she'll say, let's just change this so it doesn't sound dated. But I do have them in my books. I just try to keep their presence at a minimum, just because it's distracting. But at the same time, they have to be there, I feel like, because it's just
That's
part of
how it is. And I think it's only going to get more,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's just part of kids' life. And, there are books written that are just text messages, back and forth. And that's great. That's cool.
And here's the other thing, too. And I think when you write contemporary works, or you write works that are, of that nature, I mean, you look at F. Scott Fitzgerald, nobody's dealing with the prohibition. But,
Right,
so it obviously dates it, but it doesn't take away from the greatness of the story. So I kind of, when I hear, editors talk about, oh, let's not date it. Well, in a way, you kind of do, no matter what you do,
No matter what you do, right.
Right.
At some point it's going to make, I mean, just the fact that your narrator is from the 70s, you've pinned it there, even though you have a modern portion to it. It's like, there's also, I think, a nostalgia that would be built into a story if like in mine, every time I did texting or did some kind of thing with that, I made sure that whatever was happening was in the texting or the tech that they were using was pivotal in changing the story in a different direction. So I didn't use it. I didn't have my kids walking around facing their phones, in a hallway. They actually interacted with each other. But you do have to think of how you want to incorporate that. And I just was wondering how, you dealt with it. So did you use it in a similar fashion? Like when you wanted to maneuver the story in a certain way, you maybe threw it in, or?
Yeah, I was actually able with the visitors kind of stay away from cell phones because they don't work on the plantation. And that's kind of one of the creepy.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Ghostly,
that's clever.
And the ghost says, oh, those things don't work here, because he's had history of that. But in my other books, it needs to be something that moves the story along, or moves a character arc along. In the story I'm writing right now, which is a time travel novel, a middle grade time travel novel, I'm having more texting between the main character and his two friends back from where he just moved away from, which we don't ever see on paper, just in the texting. So they have to have their own arc of story through those texts. It can't just be, hey, what'd you do today? Blah, 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 blah. That would get very old.
Right. No, and and you get to the point where you're also like trying to figure out, I think, because it can be fodder to move the plot forward, like in 13 Reasons Why. I'm sure the original books, I didn't read the original book, but it was written early enough that social media wasn't a thing. But, the kids nowadays, when in our era, because I'm also like you, I'm over the big 50, in our era, word of mouth was what you had to worry about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Whereas in this age with the kids, one tweet, one text, one, can change a child's life irrevocably.
Yeah, you're right.
Do you know what I mean? And so
You're
they deal with the
absolutely right.
pressure that I think we can't even possibly imagine. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah. And I have a couple of friends whose kids I turn to a lot that are the age that I write about. And like I asked one of them one time, just because she's constantly on her phone, and I wasn't criticizing her for that, and she knows me well enough to know that I wasn't. I said, I'm just curious, what is it that makes you feel like you need to always be checking? And again, I said it in some way that she wasn't offended because I wasn't trying to offend her. But she said something like what you're saying, I have to stay on top of it.
Mhm.
She has to stay on top of it so she's not left out or feels left out, or if something's not said about her that she doesn't know about. And I just kind of really felt for her when she said that. I was like, oh, okay, I get that. I'm sorry.
It's a level of their world that we can't even imagine with that. I mean, like I said, all you had to worry about when we were growing up was, that you weren't part of the rumor mill.
Exactly. And they have to, if they don't respond to a friend quickly enough, then the friend gets mad or they think something's wrong, and it just creates
Especially
more
with all the
drama.
heightened teenage angst that goes on anyways.
Oh, all the angst. Yes, all the angst. But
all the angst and bad poetry.
right. But I think I prefer to write stories that are a little more not that there's anything wrong about that, but I just want to focus on the story, and I don't want that to be too much of a distraction. But like you said, it's got to be realistic.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
Is there anything else you want folks to know about your works?
Well, I mentioned that I am working on a new book about time travel, which after The Visitors, I thought I wasn't going to write any more complicated books. And here I go again. But I'm working on that. And I have some book festivals coming up in the fall. And if people want to stay in touch or, see what I'm doing, they can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Greg Howard Books, or check out my website, greghowardbooks.com.
Sweet. And you've already teased your time travel novel and given people your socials and the fact that you're doing some book shows and signings, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I'm doing some school visits. I'm doing book signings and book festivals, and hopefully this year, later in the year, we'll be able to give some more news about the Whispers film and the Middle Schools of Drag TV show. Both those things are moving along quite well. I can't announce anything yet.
So will you be announcing it on your website, on the socials?
I'll probably be announcing it on my socials. There'll be a press release in the next few months about it. We have a pretty big name director who is signed on to the Whispers, and I'm so excited, and I wish I could be shouting it from the world.
Soon enough, you'll get to soon enough.
Soon enough, yes.
All right. Any final words of wisdom?
Keep reading, keep writing.
Perfect.
There you go.
Greg was awesome. I'm glad he jumped in.
Yeah. No, it was great. And it was a very, very great conversation because of the whole, race thing and stuff. It's what kids deal with. They don't, I think that parents are doing a disservice to these kids because they're not, giving them latitude to explore and find their understanding of how the world works.
Right.
That's what it boils down to.
Right.
So. Anyways, welcome to Wrote Reviews, everybody, our segment where we review new episodes on TV that have queer content or a movie that we decide to pull from everything that's out there, new and old. And this week we are doing Latter Days.
It falls under the old category.
2000,
yeah,
so much
2003.
so that if you go look at the IMDb and you see the actors, they look much older now.
As a matter of fact, in rewatching this, Carrie Payton, who plays the character Andrew, is Ezekiel on The Walking Dead, and it threw me for a loop. Seeing him as a young man.
Yep.
Waiting tables.
The story is a promiscuous gay party animal falls for a young Mormon missionary, leading to crisis, cliche, and catastrophe. So, and it is billed as a comedy, drama, romance.
And it was all of those. I have a question. What was going on in the world that made you decide to pull this one out of the archives?
It's one of my favorite films.
Okay.
And I'll get to the reason why as we get into the review. But and it's really weird because it has an actress that I'm always iffy about.
Which one?
Jacqueline Bisset. Sometimes I like her in things, and other times I just go, "Oh, girl, no, you're just not right for this." And so this is one of the films where I actually do like her in the movie. So it's also, I think if I remember correctly, the year that it was released was 2003. Yeah. So it was after the gay 90s evolution where a lot of queer content was starting to make it, the Will and Grace towards the end of the decade. And, so you had a lot of that stuff starting to happen. And this was the first film I saw that was unabashedly queer.
Right.
It had no apologies about the world. It had no apologies about the party boys. It was just, this is a slice of LA life. This is how stuff goes down. And then you insert a Mormon missionary into it who's questioning sexuality. And I thought it was a very interesting way to tackle religion at the same time as queer people trying to just find their place in the world and finding someone to love and someone to care for. And I also liked the reset of the party boy learning something valuable in the end.
Yep.
So what did you think? Let's get started with you, because you said that when you first saw it the first time, you didn't like it.
I did not like it the first time I saw it. 2003. Yeah. I was not ready to deal with the realities of conversion therapy, which Elder Davis, the Mormon character in this, has a touch with in this film. And it's kind of hard to watch, a little bit of a alert there.
But it's true to life.
It is true to life. That back in 2003, I hadn't even really heard of it. So when it appeared on the screen in front of me, it was a hard watch. This time, not so much. But again, I'm older, I'm wiser. I've actually seen a lot of media about it now. So I was ready for it. I wasn't back then.
So it was more just of where your headspace was at the time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I own it. It was me, not the film.
Okay, well, what do you think now with a rewatch? And by the way, children, before he answers, think about that, when you watch a lot of these films that were dated in the past, it may not be to where we are currently, but you need to kind of understand our history, especially with the current political climate.
Right.
Our rights are being drawn into question along with what's happening with Roe v. Wade. Watch these movies and understand it was a different time. So remember what time, when it was released, and just try to look at it without any woke sensibility. And I'm learning to hate that word. But I think that, that's one of the caveats to when we do an older film, like we did Making Love, and I'll put the link up here. It was a very different time. It was a very different era. Things were going on politically that were very different. So take in the stories and try to understand them within the context of the period that it's being told. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and following up on that, this as a major national release dealing with those issues also had pretty close to full frontal nudity for the male characters. It was pushing some boundaries for 2003.
It definitely was. It was definitely an eye opener. It was also, it didn't shy away from the promiscuity of the kind of party boy character, Christian, which I always thought was funny that his name was Christian, and we're dealing with a religious toned story with Mormons, so I just think it's very interesting. It also has gay favorite icon Mary Kate Place, who plays the Mormon mother. And she's a staunch ally of the community, so it was nice to see her. Amber Benson from Buffy the Vampire Slayer was in it, so it's got a lot of people that were, and as you said, from Walking Dead. So there are these actors that you go, oh my god, So it's got something for everyone from a cast point of view. I thought it was. I liked the cast. I don't think there was anybody that was miscast in it. I thought it dealt with the Mormon aspect, and part of my family is Mormon on my dad's side, so I kind of understand some of the mentality of that and some of the way that it is very black and white. Although I think that there is movement now within the Mormon community, and there are enough Mormon people that are stepping up and starting to change the conversation, which I think is a good thing. And I think, it's the same thing that's happening in the Catholic Church now. There are things that are changing there too. So I think religion is learning to evolve and catch up to where society is. But
you just use religion and evolution in the same sentence.
Yeah, I know. One can hope that they evolve.
Let's move on to our ratings, shall we?
Okay, all right. You start, because I did the last one.
True. Overall production, I gave it a 4. Script screenplay, gave it a 4. Again, first time through, it was hard, just topic-wise. Second time through, not so much. I actually got to enjoy the love story more this time. Sound, lighting, score.
And by the way, the two main actors do a marvelous job in playing the tension in their evolving romance.
Yes, they do. Sound, lighting, score, I gave it a 3.5 because the sound isn't balanced, and sometimes it's louder than it needs to be, and other times it's so quiet you have to turn it back up. Art direction, costuming, give it a 4. It perfectly 2003, felt very LA or Idaho. Casting 4, like Baz said, everybody was...
Although I think LA substituted for Idaho in the shot of the house. I'm like, I know where that is.
Fair enough.
Putting a little fake snow down doesn't change it.
Casting 4, I think everybody was very well cast. I loved this group working together. Directing 4, and mostly because I didn't see the director's hand in it, which sometimes is fine. I think it let the story tell itself this time. Queer themes presented, definitely a 5. Everything from, like Beth said, party boys to how religion handles us. It was all there. So personal overall rating, when you average those up, is a 4.
Excellent. Mine are all 5s with the exception of the sound, lighting, score. And I think the lighting also was an issue in some sequences. You can definitely tell it is of its era. For one, there's no social media. There's no big time with the phones and all that stuff. That stuff is not part and parcel.
As a matter of fact, there were still Blackberries and Palm Pilots.
So it really does. It has that dated element to it. So in a way, it has a nostalgia of its own. But I think that one of the things I love the most about it was the fact that it did what it set out to do in telling this story. And I think the cast was brilliant. Wes Ramsey and Steve Sandvoss, who played Christian and Aaron Davis, respectively. I think that for the time, they took some bold choices and they really worked with it. I thought the supporting cast was well played. I really did like how Christian evolved in trying to be a better person and helping out someone who was dealing with HIV, and finding his path to being I don't want to say a better human being, because I don't want to shame those who are in the party circuit, but at the same time, he was going for a goal that he was trying to achieve in his life. He found a connection to Aaron, and he was trying to find a way to understand his world and to work his way into that. So I think that it was a great evolutionary part of the story and the plot.
Mhm.
So while I give the sound lighting score a 3, like you, I the rest of it I think is very well done. You know, of its time, and I remember more of my ratings are coming from when I first saw it than
Mm.
it is in rewatches, and I have rewatched this film several times. But I liked the way that it evolved. I liked Mary Kay Place's portrayal of the conflicted religious mother. Because in those Mormon things, I think the women have it much harder than the men, who tend to be so black and white. It's easier for them to draw the line the way they do, whereas the mothers have that maternal instinct, and I think that's a much more complex character to play. And of course, Mary Kay Place pulls it off brilliantly. She's always good in whatever she does. So I think casting her as the mother was a brilliant choice. And so, you know, that's where I am. I ended up with a 4.75.
Nice.
So that's it for this week. Stay tuned for our next little segment that we're calling What Are We On About? All right, so we're back again with our new segment, What Are We On About? So for this one, we're going to do the Who Won the Week in the end, because we would like to end on a positive note. So what are we on about? I want to say that right now I am listening to film scores again. And while I did like young Sherlock Holmes, because the writing bug is starting to really take hold, I'm now listening to more film scores. And lately it's been King Arthur and Legend of the Sword with... can't think of the guy's name now. Charlie Hunnam. And if you haven't seen the film, it's kind of a great film. It's a nice popcorn movie. And I liked the score to it. It's very Celtic. It's got a lot of old Celtic feel to it. So I'm enjoying listening to it, and it's kind of creating, you know, starting the creative juices. So that's what I'm listening to. I'm watching more and more Russian YouTubers. I want to give a shout out to Vasa in the Hay. It's a gentleman who is out in the rural areas of Russia. And it is a great way for people to understand that the Russian people are not the Russian government, especially in Russia. You know, people tend to give these Russian YouTubers a hard time saying, you're out here talking about this and there are people dying in Ukraine. Yeah, honey, but they can't do anything about it. If they try, they'll be in jail for 15 years. So they're doing what they can in trying to, you know, espouse the culture, show people what life in Russia is like. So I say, take off your American glasses or your West glasses for a little bit and give them a moment on the platform to talk about what goes on in their country, so we have a better understanding of the Russian people in this very hard time. They are a great vast majority are not with them. Don't believe the statistics or the polls, because Russian polls are controlled by the state media. A lot of Russians want to say something about what's going on, and they can't. So my whole thing is give them a look. I'll say Ellie from Russia, Nikki Proshkin, 1472, I think is the other one I like, and Vasa in the Hay. There are some really great YouTubers out there. Oh, and My English World is another one. There's some really great Russian YouTubers out there that could use our support, could use Western people watching them. They have so far been able to work out, many of them have been able to work out payment for doing these videos, and they build them for a Western audience. So I think it's a great way to let the Russian people know we don't blame them for what their government is doing right now. They see it as a war crime. They just can't call it that. So that's who I'm watching. And I'm still reading. I have two books that I'm reading now. Johnny Appleseed, which is a native queer story written by Joshua Whitehead, who is a brilliant writer. I highly recommend it. It's been on the top of a lot of Canadian book lists. Definitely check that out. And I'm still working on Dr. Redford and John Barrett's Proud Pink Sky. So those are the two that I'm reading simultaneously. I switch off, so I'm enjoying both. And I think that's it. Oh, and the other thing I'm watching, I want to give a shout out to Star Trek Strange New World just started. Yay! And I am all about that. But this is the one I've been waiting for. Is once they announced it, I'm like, yes, I will so be there every Thursday with the popcorn.
So that's also on our what we started watching this week because my husband is the Trekkie in the area. And for those of you who don't know the story, this is what happens after Discovery has slipped into the future, and we're going to follow Captain Pike as he works his way
It's
towards
the early
Admiral,
years of the Enterprise crew.
but it's the early years of the
Captain Kirk.
Enterprise, and it's where Captain Kirk's father comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So you get to see that element of the story. And I saw a really good write-up about this saying that the technology and storyline is more accessible than Discovery, which is so far fantastic sometimes that it loses people. So fingers crossed. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm hoping it really flies. And I kind of like that it did. For me, at least, it had that original Star Trek series feel.
Yeah, it absolutely did. As a matter of fact, they even have said that they're going to go out and discover new worlds, which is kind of the boldly go where nobody, they're
Which is
back
what
to it.
happened in the original series. Yeah.
They're back to it. It's not going to be a big overarching galactic war.
Yeah. So, kind of cool. And you get to see the Enterprise remind you of the old Enterprise, but with like newer looking tech, but it's very familiar territory. They even have the handles in the elevator, in the lift. And so there's so many touches. You just go, oh, Easter egg, Easter egg.
But so we actually did a side-by-side comparison. The one for this show has a little bit more Art Deco-ness to it.
Yeah, there is a touch of that. Yes.
Just a touch.
But it's a little more elegant. There's a panache to it.
It is very well done.
Yeah.
So we should have let you go second because yours is globally important, and my list of things this week is utterly silly.
Oh, that's fine.
Utterly silly. I'm
fine with silly.
Invoke the silliness. So my brothers and I are planning my parents' 50th wedding anniversary this summer, and so we started looking for music. And one of my brothers dropped this on me, Backwoods Bougie by Hayden Joseph. You have not heard this song. I caution you that it is earworm worthy. It is country. It's got some twang to it, but it's funny. It's very funny. And it is now in the playlist for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. So that's what I listened to this week that unfortunately is still playing in my head nonstop because I can't stop it. I warned you, silliness. Still reading the Hazard and Somerset detective novels. I think they're short-ish. They're a little longer than novella, but not by much. So I think I'm on to the fourth one now. Still enjoying it very much. And are we doing the Who Won the Week?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's start with Who Won the Week. Who won the week for you?
Julia. The HBO Max series wrapped up. At the end of the series, the final 2 episodes, she had to deal with, did her show put women in a worse place than they were in before she started? Did her show cause women to have to stand in the kitchen longer hours because of the length of some of her recipes? And she struggled. And it is a very good window into the plight of the woman of the era. But it's handled gracefully and very well. And it ends on a don't let the critics get you down, do what you love note, which I recommend for everyone everywhere.
Excellent. All right. My Who Won the Week is Vice President Kamala Harris for her speech at the Emily List function after the whole Roe v. Wade
how dare they tell a woman what she can do and
draft
cannot
summary
do
got
with her own
released
body.
with her How Dare They speech. So it was very impassioned, very powerful. And people need to understand that it's not just about abortion and women's choice. what the Supreme Court is trying to codify in it is they're trying to say if it's not in the Constitution, it can be struck.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, anything, there are people talking about interracial marriage. There are people talking about, queer LGBTQ issues. So just realize this is the first brick in that wall of rights that we've built. So my Who Won the Week was Kamala Harris for coming out right away at the top when it broke. She was out there punching through the wall and saying, how dare they? Mm-hmm. So for me, it's an uplifting, positive movement because as liberals and progressives and independents and even centrists rise to the call, get out and vote. Every single vote matters no matter where you are in the country. So do your duty because we want to make sure we can still do it after these elections.
Yes.
So that's Who Won the Week for me. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. All right, folks. On the Edge is produced by Real Ravens Media. For disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.rotepodcast.com. If you enjoy learning about new artists, please like and subscribe so you get the alerts for new episodes. We'd like to extend a huge thank you to Greg Howard for being with us. Greg, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thanks
for doing it on short notice.
And short notice, I know.
Anytime.
Now, pick up any one of Greg's books, but may I recommend The Visitors, and then have a conversation with a child. It's important. We love you all. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Oh, what's that? Closing time. The bums rush in Melody, dear.